right now, just a heads up.
Okay, not a problem.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Other Underground Railroad. I'm your host, Dr. Jason Nichols, and today I have an excellent special guest with me, my close friend, my brother, mi hermano, Dr. Jack Monell from the University of Winston-Salem State. I'm sorry, I totally flubbed that. But how you doing, Jack?
I'm doing well, hermano. Yeah, it's Winston-Salem State University. Let's get that correct.
I figured that, I'm so used to saying the University of Maryland that, like, I always mix it up. I'm like, the University of, and for some reason, I can't see you in the video anymore. I don't know.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see what happened.
What's going on there?
There we go. Okay, all right.
Okay, there we go. Perfect.
Yeah, there we go. All right.
So, I was really excited to do this interview. I'm interviewing a lot of different people, a lot of different interesting people, but you were one of the most interesting people that I know. You know what I'm saying? So can you, give our audience just a little breakdown of who you are and how you got to the place where you are today?
No, I appreciate it, man. And you tend to give me a lot of deference, but I'm just kind of simple. But for the listeners, for the viewers, man. So by ethnicity, I'm Puerto Riqueño. I'm a Afro Latino, Latinx, black Puerto Rican. Born out of New York City, which many refer to us as New Yorkers. So born and raised in New York City in Brooklyn, and my life's trajectory, similar to many folks who emigrated to the island or to the states rather. My family came here in the 50s, and for argument's sake, my father and them tried to integrate well, but back in the 60s that was difficult for our community, particularly in New York City. So he was a musician, did his thing, and he did Afro Latino jazz, salsa, merengue. So he did his thing in the music thing. And ultimately, with his union with my mom, I came about. So born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, I grew up pretty similar to most. I'm a housing project kid. So I grew up pretty humble, but I was always smart, book smart, read a lot, things like that. Early on, I was always interested to know, why is our community suffering like this, And I saw the Latinos, I saw the Afro Latinos in the community, I saw that, the African Americans in the community struggling. And then I saw in other communities where, predominantly white communities were flourishing. And I was like, that just didn't seem right. So I had a very interesting kind of wish early on to explore that further. So throughout my younger years, I was not always on the right side or the righteous side of the law, so to speak. So to put it into context for everyone, I am a criminologist by training. I am a justice studies professor here, but I wasn't always on this side of the justice studies, I guess, paradigm, so to speak. So during the 1980s, I was involved with a juvenile gang called the Decepticons, which was obviously a fictional cartoon that was very popular back then. And we never necessarily identified as a gang per se. That was a label, of course, that the community and law enforcement and the media identified. Because for those who recall and are old enough to remember, in the 1980s, gangs were not plenty in New York City. We kind of considered ourselves kind of crews, and the media went with the term posses, and I always hated that term because gangs was primarily at this particular time in the West Coast. With Compton and things like that, the Bloods and the Crips, yeah. And then in the mid part of the country with the Vice Lords and things like that in Chicago. So I ran with that. I did that. Putting my work in the street. Always smart though, man. I was always wild. I was that dude in the streets, but I was still reading and learning, but I wasn't that smart because obviously I was arrested several times leading into 1988, where ultimately I was convicted of a robbery charge as an accessory, so because the other guys were the ones they wanted. They were older, of course. I was 15 years old, and I spent 4 years in juvenile facilities until I was 19. And that was probably the worst 4 years of my life, to the point that almost 30-something years later, I still have a lot of demons about that period of my life. But because of that, it put me in a position to really pursue criminal justice, criminology, sociology, and social work, because I'm also a social worker, to explore it further, to research it, to study it, to work with it. So, that's what brought me to. So I worked in the field of juvenile probation, juvenile facilities. I worked for the adult federal sector. And finally, I ended up becoming a professor, which I always wanted to do, man. So that was the gist of it. And it's more in depth than that, but that's kind of like my version of the 60-second elevator speech that just to give kind of folks some context about who I am.
So, I have so many questions that popped up there. And first of all, of course, because I'm nosy, I want to know what exactly made that particular period when you were locked up really difficult, because a lot of the people that I've known who have been locked up, I know one guy who was locked up in juvie, but most of the people I know have been in the adult system, to be honest. Have been in prisons and jails. And I knew one guy who was in the, who growing up, he got sent to juvenile. He stabbed some kid with a pen or something like that. Ended up in a juvenile facility. And he literally would not talk about it. Like, he was like, not talking about it. And, we were 19, 18, so we're all, pressing him like, come on, what happened? So I'm still a little curious, like, what was it that happened? Was it the actions of the other inmates? I don't know if inmate's the right word, adjudicated youth.
Right.
Or was it the staff, the facilities? What was it that made it really bad?
Very, very good question. So a culmination, we're both professors, so, kind of all of the above, D, right? So, two things. So in October of 1988, when them officers put their handcuffs on me, I literally knew my life flashed before me. I knew my life was over because I had a series of events with the law that I knew, they're not playing with me this time. So from that moment on, I developed, kind of this internal depression thing. Like, I was like, oh, wow, I really messed up. Because like I said, I've always been bright. And my trajectory was like, go to college. I was going to be that kid to get out of the hood, go to college, do great things, right? But we all know that sometimes life has a way of throwing curveballs at you. So when I got locked up, this is 1988. Now, you know me personally. You've seen me. I'm not the biggest guy. You know what I'm saying? So, and back then, I'm probably 30 pounds lighter. I was tough, but I wasn't that tough.
Right.
So from day one, and I was locked up in the Spofford Juvenile Facility. It is no longer there. It's actually, it was tore down, and now it's condos, typical. Similar to the Lawton facilities down there in Virginia. And Spofford was this big boogeyman place for kids, for juveniles. The way people talk about Rikers Island is the way Spofford was for juveniles. Right. So I go in there, and I was only there for 6 months before they sent me upstate New York, which is where the brunt of this is. So for me, part of it was, and to be quite frank, like, I knew about sexuality. I even knew about kind of, which we call LGBTQ today, but back then it was kind of like the whole homosexuality thing. When we talk about, sexual identity. And I never knew that young men were gay at that particular time. Right. And I witnessed, indirectly, sexual assaults and that trauma. And you see the staff, which we called them counselors at the time, which is, it's an irony in words because they're counselors, but basically they used to beat your ass. I don't know if I can say that, but they used to beat you down.
Yeah, no.
So it's like, I used to sleep with my clothes on and my state issue boots, because you never knew. For people, who are listening and watching, if you read the book Sleepers is a book. It was turned into a movie. Sleepers was a great depiction of what happened in the New York State Division for Youth back in the 70s and the 80s. And, you know, trauma. I mean, once I was I cried every day, hermano. I cried every day. I hated it, dude. I'm not one of those kind of institutionalized dudes. Like my whole family, half of them were criminals, half of them were like law-abiding citizens. They would go back and forth. I hated it. Dude, I hated it. I hated, they told you when to use the bathroom. They told you when to take showers. You know, my only solace was that I was smart. And I used to read. And I used to read to my buddies. I used to read their letters. And they couldn't read. 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds could not read. They'd be like, yo, Jack, can you read this for me? So that was like my little hustle in there. Hey, give me some commissary. I'll read your letters to you or whatever. They couldn't read and write. And even then I was like, damn, doesn't everybody know how to read? Like you take like those little things you take for granted, B. So I got to a point in my incarceration that I was known as a troublemaker. And in the it was almost like these slave movies we see sometimes, man. In the dawn, in the early morning, the dawn of morning or the late at night, they pretty much handcuffed me, chained me up, and they moved me to another facility. They moved me to another facility, and my welcoming committee basically beat me down for like 20 minutes, man. And just said, we know what you did there. You're not doing that here. And I was like, okay, damn, and these are grown men, dude. These, I'm by that time I'm 16, and you got grown men, in the 20s, 30s, and 40s. A lot of them were ex-football players. It seems like a lot of football players ended up going to work there. And and then just honestly, the emotional toil, the only solace, and I tell students this all the time today, was that I could read, B. I immersed myself in reading, building your intellect and and swearing. Like I used to tell psychologists, because they make you see these guys when you're there. I used to tell them, man, I ain't never coming back and I'm taking your job. And they used to laugh, whatever. And I used to be like, okay, sleep if you want. I'm not, listen. And then this one counselor who happened to be my frat brother, he was like, dude, you don't belong here. You're different. And I was like, what do you mean? We was having a conversation about AIDS, to be honest. And my father, ended up passing away from HIV. So, we're talking. I was like, you do realize that with most, diseases, you won't find a cure to cure it. You'll find a cure to prevent it, theoretically,
Right.
Sadly, that's kind of been the pattern. And he looked at me kind of twisted like, dude, why are you here again?
Right.
And so they really encouraged me to go to college. So my last year, so I did 4 years. I went in at 15. I got out on March 2nd, 1992. I remember it like yesterday. They gave me, I think I had about $50. I put my my clothes in a bag, and they gave me a bus ticket and said, go back home. And man, dude, I left and I never looked back. And sometimes I still wake up with sweats, and I try to deal with that through counseling and stuff, but it's like, imagine yourself. Remember when you were 15, 16, even if you was a knucklehead, you're messing with girls, you're going on dates, you're playing sports, you're going to your prom. Dude, I missed all of that.
Right.
So just that aspect of regret, because I missed that. Even like I said, I'm in my 40s now, and it still bothers me,
Yeah. It kind of humbles me, you telling that story, because, I can sit here and complain about my childhood and all that. And I'm like, yo, I didn't experience anything like that. You know what I'm saying? I didn't see anything like that. I may have had challenges, but nothing like that. I wasn't crying every day. I wasn't, you know what I'm saying? Right. And I'm interested because, I'm interested a lot in, I watch all the prison documentaries and hear from the people who are incarcerated. And you being an Afro Latino, what was it like? Because oftentimes the people that I've known in the New York system especially are like, yo, Puerto Ricans over
Pick a
here.
side. Pick a side.
Yeah, it's not. You can't be both in there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that was a blessing. That was a blessing for me early on. And I'm trying to teach this to my sons now. I've always been able to navigate spaces very well. I've always been that kind of intuitiveness that it's internal. Nobody teaches it to you. I've always been able to adapt. So that was one of the first things early on. I remember coming into the system, and mind you, back then, my identity was definitely much different because of the fact that, you know, I was operating kind of almost under that old kind of variation of who my identity was as a Latino at that time.
Right.
There was always that kind of that split between blacks and Latinos back then.
Right.
But for me, I've always been kind of like immersed in both without appreciating why. So for me, it was simple. I just arguably did gravitate to kind of the African side, to the black side. And once again, this is way before the Latin Kings and all of them kind of came to the city hard. They
Right.
still were in Chicago. They weren't in New York during this period.
Right. Yeah.
So I oftentimes wondered if they were like in the mix back then, how would I roll, right? And
Right.
but see, I was a Decepticon, so a lot of us were we had our little crews while we were inside. But even then, I didn't identify as that. I was just like, yo, I'm Jack from Brooklyn, and you know, I'm Jack from Brooklyn with the whitest name you can have.
Right.
So people used to look at me like, dude, who are you? Like, because my name wasn't Juan or Jose or
Yeah.
Jesus. I come into this piece with the whitest name, and then my last name is Monell, which it's not Rodriguez or Gonzalez. So they're
Right.
like, "Are you French?" Or like, "What are you, dude?" Because there were some Haitian cats who were Monels, but they were French. Obviously, they spoke Creole. So but I think then it was easier to navigate. To answer your question, it was easier to navigate the system then because the pressure was different, and because of who I was by that time, how I established myself. I think today, or even a few years later in the '90s, when the Latin Kings really started coming through hard,
Yeah.
I probably would have had more of a problem with them. Um, they probably would have had more problem with me than me with them, because they probably would have been like, "Yo, you're supposed to be over here." I'm like, I'm where I need to be. So I could see that having produced some beefs along the way. Absolutely.
Yeah. It's funny because I feel like I'm the same in the sense of knowing how to navigate spaces. You know what I'm saying? Like I never feel like, oh, we leaving him out. You know what I'm saying? Because
Right.
he's different or whatever. And maybe that's me, coming up in Spanish Harlem. You know what I'm saying? I always joke, like if you heard my sister on the telephone when she was a teenager, you'd have been like, that's a Puerto Rican kid. Like, there's
Right.
no,
Right. Right.
that's not black.
Right.
I'm not an African American girl. That's
Right.
you know what I mean? And she just kind of like she had an identity crisis, but that's a whole different thing. But why do you think that you were able to not look back, and so many youth from your era and even today are incapable of doing that? Why is there such recidivism?
It's a good question, man. So when we look at the system as a whole, when we look at juvenile justice, the system of juvenile justice, which is an extension of the criminal justice system, we look at adjudication. What are these what are these things in place for juveniles to reform, basically, right? How do we get them to reform? And every state does it differently. There's no autonomy in it. There is autonomy in it. There's no uniformity in it, rather. So what they do here in North Carolina, they don't do in NY. What they do in NY, they don't do in MD. So
Right.
here in North Carolina, for instance, which is my current frame of reference, like we've really worked hard to kind of change it. So we have something called youth development centers, which basically, and they can be secure. They range from super secure to not secure. Here, they work hard at not only minimizing intake, but reducing recidivism. And how you do that? Through aftercare. So you prepare them while they're in educational, vocational training, psychology treatment, whatever it is, drug treatment, whatever it is. We address it on the front end while they're adjudicated, and then as they transition, you support them on the outside. Every system doesn't do that. Number one. Number two is, I'll just be real blunt with you, and you know me personally.
Right.
I mean, ultimately, just desire, like desire. Right. I had a little bit of hope. That's the other thing. If you don't have no hope, you're not gonna do it. If you don't see at the end of the tunnel, damn, I can make it. I don't really know how yet, but I can make it. For me, I knew my hook, was school. Right. Like I knew school would get me through. At least that's what I believed at the time, and I still subscribe to it. Right. So for me, it was like school and desire. When I came home, I had to cut off a lot of people. Right. And then a lot of my boys even cut me off, like in a friendly way, like, we know you're trying to change your life. You probably don't want to be around here. Like they respected me enough to push back. And sometimes I felt like, yo, I'm a big boy. They'd be like, no, this ain't no manhood thing. We're not insulting your manhood. Right. But if you can't do it both ways. Either you in or you're gonna be Joe College, which we respect, but you can't be playing both, because at the end you're gonna hurt yourself even more, So for a lot of young people, they don't have the support systems upon release. And for a lot of these kids, I wasn't in the drug game. So let me preface that by stating I never did the drug thing. So it wasn't like I was making buku money. But that's a big thing for kids today, right? They're selling a little crack, they're selling a little this, and they make $500 a day. You telling them they got to work for minimum wage and maybe make $200 a week. Right. That's a hard sell. That's a very hard sell for them. Right. And they weigh you look at classical theory, they weigh the pros and the cons. They're like, you know what? The pleasure outweighs the pain. I'll risk going to jail if I can make this money. And until we are able to counter that, man, we're going to continuously see juveniles recidivate at high rates.
But you know what, and again, like, I'm going back to Freakonomics. If you read Freakonomics,
right.
What was it? The average street level drug dealer makes less than minimum wage. They were saying, like,
for the hours they put in.
And so it's like, when I look at it, and I've known people, I've had family members who have been in the drug game heavy, and gone in and out. I'm like, when you break this down economically, the lost wages from being incarcerated, when you break it down in terms of what you made on the street, and the risks involved too. You know what I mean? You get shot, stabbed, locked up, beat up by the cops. When you put all of that together, you know what I mean? You might be much better off and make much more money at that minimum wage job. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you look at it long term, but I think one of the things, we have a nihilistic element in our community where people don't think long term. You know what I'm saying? Like a lot of these, particularly young Black men, you know what I'm saying? And some young Latino men, they don't see the long game, which is something that is a blessing for you, because you were able to go in there, and being incarcerated, I think a lot of times gives people that myopia. But for you, it actually gave you the vision to see, this ain't where I want to be, and I have other options.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit it right on the head, man. I mean, if you talk to most, let's just say, urban youth across the country who are 14, 15, a lot of them, their initial goal really is to make it to 18. Oftentimes, they don't think beyond that, man. Yeah. They don't think beyond that. They don't think beyond a year of whatever it is they're doing. I recall every year, all the hustlers would be like, this is gonna be my year. This is going, like, that's like where you and I probably plan 5, 10-year, 15-year goals. They don't think that way. And a lot of that, unfortunately, is because they're so caught up into that lifestyle of the, now immediacy, and the false, because you said it, you broke down the numbers, the false perception that hustling is going to make you like, Frank White or something, or Frank Lucas or whomever, and that's not the reality. Unless you really balling, unless you running things, you're not making that kind of money, man. Not on the street, man.
And, it always reminds me, rest in peace to Prodigy for Mobb Deep, but one of the things he said that came into my head when you were speaking was he said, until my death, my goal is to stay alive. That was literally it. Like, I'm gonna die at some point. I'm just trying to stay alive,
Right.
and until you start reaching for more, you're gonna be stuck in that same cycle.
And,
No, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say, but then a lot of that too is, we look at the environment, and I'm a product of my environment, but it didn't predict what I became, but you know, we can go. I mean, we probably could talk for another segment on this, but it's just the access to resources are limited too. So like you and I, you know, quite surprisingly, New York had resources, or you had people who kind of saw promise in you, so they kind of geared you out of it. Right now I'm in East Winston, man, and we're working hard because East Winston is the poorest area. It's a part of the poorest area in the state and the fourth in the nation. I
Wow.
mean, people born in poverty in East Winston are generationally doomed unless they just change their trajectory through education, sports, whatever the case may be. So, that's it's to what you're talking about. It's access to resources, and we talk about that all the time.
Right.
Me, I had somebody tell me I could go to college.
Right.
Yeah, I was in a bad situation, but he told me, dude, you probably should go to college, and kind of gave me the early preparedness to look at stuff and kind of think beyond those 4 blocks of my projects.
Right.
So.
And what do you think? So, in terms of prevention, what do you think we could do to keep a young Jack Monell, out of the system? You know what I mean? Or, keeping even some of the people who maybe didn't have the promise that you had the brain smarts that you had. What do we do to divert them from going down that path that goes from juvenile prison, which in most cases, juvenile prison leads to adult prison. It's almost like high school to college.
Right.
So what do you think, looking back at your situation, what could have been done?
For me, I'm always a big proponent of early intervention, right? So, like, I sit on the Juvenile Crime Prevention Council here in the county, which it's a county level governmental council that deals with juvenile justice here in our county. And one of the things that I've been pushing is early intervention. So for me, school identification, community, and mainly community, right? Schools have sports, theater, they have all types of access to things constructively for people to do, young people. What happens when they go home? And for me, that's where we falter as a society. If you go to the burbs, yeah, they may not have a lot of basketball courts out there, but they have stuff for these kids to do,
Right.
But I remember as a kid, I mean, we had police athletic league, and I played ball periodically back then. I was still a knucklehead, but my situation was a little different. But what are we putting in the communities to help young people, right? Because nobody's asking for a handout. This just irritates me to high heaven. We're just talking about access, equitable access. You dig? So,
Right.
what do we have in the community? Do we have theater companies? Do we have dance companies? Do we have things? Because young people, idle time. Listen, I don't like idle time now. I'm a grown man. At
Right.
15, 14, and 12, if I'm bored, I'm going to get into some mischievous behavior because I ain't got shit else to do. And I think so then it begs the answer, or it begs the question, what do the politicians really want? Because it's not incredibly costly to fund a local community this or a local community that. Do you want this to continue to be? Do you want these kids to offend? Because then we talk about the school to prison pipeline. And then we
Right.
talk about, charging individuals, charging them, paying individuals to make sure we keep these juvenile prisons operable. So
Right.
then what, that's my issue with that.
Yeah. So how did you, because I know you have, 2 sons, you know, really strong, well-adjusted sons. I believe one of them is an athlete at North Carolina A&T.
Yep.
The other one I follow on Instagram, you know, always flexing. It looks like he's a man, but seems like a very good kid. How did you keep them from falling in the pitfalls that you fell into?
Well, fortunately for them, just like you and the blessings that you and I have struggled to acquire over the years, we've provided different environments for them and access.
Right.
So for my sons, my sons didn't grow up in a city. They grew up in a house, in a good community, middle class community. I mean, ain't nobody over here balling,
Right.
But they had access to sports. They had access to self defense classes. They've traveled the globe with me on occasion, depending on it. They've been exposed to culture, and they know about my past.
Right.
And that has been somewhat of a teenage rites of passage for them. Once they reached 15, I said, we need to have a talk. And I showed them stuff and pictures, and they're like, wow. Then all my toughness makes sense when they see it, because I don't believe in keeping my sons out of the loop. I believe information's vital for them, but everything's at time and a place where they can absorb it. So we provided them benefits just like you will provide yours. With they have access, and I do take them to the hood.
Right. I was going to ask that.
To humble them.
Right.
Because I need them to always remember that for every blessing you have, there's probably 20 that don't. And we would never ever act like we're better than anybody else. We're better for us, but you're not better than no one else.
Right.
You're not, we don't use our blessings to judge others. We're grateful for our blessings. And I think that's something that's critical for many of us who are bringing children into this world now, who are, blessed, educated, doing well career-wise. You want them to almost have the experience without having the experience, if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, definitely. That's really, to be honest, that's really what I got. You know what I'm saying? And I'm trying to give that. My son right now is, because the area that I would go back to isn't hood anymore. It's
right.
My grandmother's house, where I slept in the basement next to mice, is literally went on the market for $6 million a couple years ago. So, but we sent my son to my wife's neighborhood, and my wife is from the projects in Boston.
Okay, yeah, I know about Boston. Yeah,
from public housing in Boston. I always tell her Boston's kind of soft, but it is what it is. All our listeners from Boston, shout out to Boston.
Shout out to Roxbury Project. Shout out, man.
Absolutely, yeah. Mission Park, Mission Hill. Shout out to those. But we sent him back there. Number one, I wanted him to be around some Latinos, because where we live, it's very black and white, African American black and white. So I wanted him to be around, some Latinos, to hear Spanish, to kind of get accustomed to that, but also to realize when he goes in his grandmother's 1-bedroom apartment, you know what I mean? I want them to start getting used to that. Because we could go, they've been in my father's house, which is in North Carolina, in a gated community on a golf course. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So I don't want them to, I want them to realize, like you said, that they're not better than anybody, and that a lot of kids that don't have the advantages they have look just like them. You know what I'm saying? So I wanted them to be exposed to that. And I just really quickly do want to talk a little football. So how you think your son's season is going to go? Both of them.
Well, so both of them are sophomores, one in college, one in high school. North Carolina A&T are back-to-back champions. They've won their third championship in 4 years. So, we're hoping to repeat that. They have a tough schedule, but it's looking good. He redshirted his freshman year, so, he's going to get some burn this year.
Okay.
So we'll see how that goes. He's done well academically, and he's doing well. That's I believe in scholar athletes. He's had to build himself up. He has had an interesting transition. My youngest, My youngest is going to be a football sleeper. So, he's looking like he's going to do well. He's getting bigger, getting stronger, getting faster. But he's definitely a nerd. Definitely a nerd. Very bright. So, and I'm pushing that, man. I'm like, dude, be the owner of the team. Don't be the player. Be the owner.
Exactly. So I wanted to also, go back a little bit and talk about, Afro Latinidad.
Yeah.
And what that means, and to you. And, one of the things, the question I actually asked, I was talking to Felipe Luciano, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were having a conversation. And I was like, why the term Afro Latino? Why not African Latino? You know what I'm saying? The Afro is a hairstyle. You know what I'm saying? So just as African Americans transition,
Right.
why not transition to African Latino? And I wanted to know your point of view. I remember he just basically was like, look, we just got to Afro. Slow down.
My sentiments are kind of equal to that, right? It's like we've been fighting just to kind of get our folks on board just with that. But I just think, quite frankly, I think it's more about kind of, language more than anything, kind of verbiage. I think because the way it flows, I think, conceptually, historically, like, with the transitions of, of American blacks, African Americans now from the labels, from Negro from color to Negro to Afro to African American, we're, like he said, we're kind of like, we're still a few phases back, but my frustration con mi gente, with our people, man, is that, and it's ironic, I was just having this discussion a few hours ago, is that we have individuals, throughout history, culturally, where, through slavery and conquering, that they've really have removed our cultural heritage, and basically forced their belief systems onto us, all through Central South America to the Caribbean, up into the mainland states. So I think for many of us, for me, it took me, I still, not as much today, but maybe 10, 15 years ago, used to have incredible debates with my relatives. Because, on my father's side, we're all dark skinned, we're all dark skinned. And our family we have direct lineage to kind of the Virgin Islands. My mom's side of the family, they're fair skinned, long hair. And my grandfather, who's deceased now, on her dad, he identified as white. True Spaniard. He felt like he was a Spaniard, which, to each his own. But I think because of efforts like yourself and many others, people are starting, this younger generation is really starting, to appreciate and value and understand, right? Because a lot of this is understanding.
Yeah.
If you grew up in a house and your family says you're Puerto Rican or you're Dominican or you're Panamanian and this and that and this, and this is what you believe, and, we're not black, we're this and that, well, you're going to believe that until you're intelligent enough to figure it out on your own. And I think that takes time. It's been over 400, 500 years of reprogramming for us. It's going to probably, hopefully it won't be that long to get it back, generationally, that is. And I think many of us, it's your obligation, it's my obligation. Many of our colleagues that you and I both know, it's their obligation to ensure that our children appreciate and respect the complexity and diversity of their ethnic backgrounds, and appreciate that, and understand that, particularly in North Carolina, if you speak Spanish, everybody's Mexican. Nothing against my Mexicano brothers.
Right.
It's like, no, everybody who speaks Spanish isn't from Mexico. And they have no understanding of what, like, Afro Latinos are, Black Puerto Ricans, Black Dominican, Panamanians. They have no concept of that. If you speak Spanish, they just clump you all together. So that's a battle down here for me, B.
Yeah, now I can imagine. But one of the things that I've seen, at least from social media and other things, is the respect that these Black students, whose families have probably been in that area since they were on plantations. You know what I'm saying? The respect that they have for you, you being somebody from New York, somebody who's, Puerto Rican ethnically, has some ethnic differences, you know, they see, they definitely see something in you, and they see you as, somebody who's a leader in their community. Now, my one fear with Afro Latinidad is like, and I heard, I don't agree with Rosa on everything, but one of the things, she said that sticks with me, and she's like, you know, she was like, look, I'm Black Puerto Rican, and being Afro Latino is becoming trendy.
Yes, it has.
So how does one stop that from happening? Where because I know even some white skinned Latinos that are like, oh, I'm Afro Latino. I got a Black person somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right.
And is there a difference between having a Black ancestor, which probably most Latinos have, or at least a large portion, and being an Afro Latino, like your experience, you know what I'm saying, versus somebody who, looks like, Ricky Rosselló and is, white, basically.
Right. The problem we have today, which is it's almost a blessing and a curse, is that we constantly battle with social media, right? And how information is disseminated, oftentimes not factual information. So, individuals like yourself, myself, Rosa, a lot of other folks in kind of in our diaspora of sorts, our crew of intellects of sorts, we're battling. We use social media as a gift, right, to communicate and spread our message. But in the same vein, we have those who counter that narrative. And I think we just got to work hard. I think they do it better in cities like New York and maybe Chicago, where you have a strong demographic of us that are in control. Excuse me. I mean, you look at Hunter College in New York. I mean, they got a program.
Yeah.
You look at Brooklyn College. They got like even on the West Side, on the West Coast, you have places where they have varying Chicano studies or other types of Latino, Afro Latino, Latinx studies. When you have programs like that in schools and universities, that helps dramatically. But you and I both realize that they're kind of trying to do away with those too. So once again, we're fighting that dominant culture that they need us to be uninformed. This is my social justice hat now. They need us to be uninformed because, as the late great Malcolm X always used to say, if you keep them dumb, you can fool them on anything.
Right.
So we need to stay informed, and so people like yourself, who you really use this social media thing to your gift, and even me, using my classroom as theater, my classroom as my opportunity to use theory to apply to reality. That's how I use my voice, my platform, my medium, and I think we just need more of us. We need more of us to get the message across, and I think it's coming. I've never been big on labels. I for one hate labels.
Yeah.
I'm not an ex-con. I don't subscribe to that. You call me a felon, I might punch you in the nose. I don't believe that stuff. And I kind of feel the same way about the Latino stuff. But I do realize, for instance, 2 hours ago, a young lady was like, "Dr. Monell, what are you again?" And I almost chuckled. She was laughing. She's like, "I don't mean any disrespect." I was like, "No, that's cool, baby girl." Like, I started to explain to her, and she's like, "Oh, okay. I'm from the country, doc. And because a lot of my students come from very rural areas,
right?
So it's like their frame of reference. If you speak Spanish, you work in some field out here, or you're building houses,
right?
So I think we have to keep it pushing. I do realize and believe the name will definitely shift.
Yeah.
5 years from now, 10 years from now, it'll be some sort of identifier, whether you and I will agree about it, who knows? Or will we be probably instrumental in maybe shaping it? Shoot, who knows?
Yeah.
But I do believe, like, for now it is trend. I feel like you say, I follow a sister on Twitter. She says Afro Latino. dude, she's white as day, B. And I be looking at her pictures like I'm trying to figure out like where is the Afro part? But
Right.
I guess I'll engage with her one day about it just out of curiosity because I'm nosy too.
Yeah. But a lot of people get offended. So I know a couple of people, and I don't have a problem calling names out, but
No, you don't.
it's like I used to talk to like Caesar and William and a couple of those people, and I feel like their anger or their frustration is misdirected. I think William is a brilliant guy. Like a lot of what he writes is really dope, but he has this like weird anger towards like African Americans in particular.
Right,
Like
right.
why don't you recognize me as black? And look, I came up in Spanish Harlem, right?
Right.
And I knew tons of black Puerto Ricans, but they did not. Well, I knew lots of Puerto Ricans of all different shades, but they did not identify as black. You know what I mean? Like it was like, yo, I'm not black. You're black. You know what I'm saying? So now all of a sudden you want me to just recognize it. It is like
it doesn't work that way, yo.
Yeah, I'm letting you decide. You tell me is my thing. It's like I will recognize whoever's black if they want to be recognized as black.
The first time, and I know we're kind of winding down, the first time I heard the term Black Puerto Rican was when I read the book Down by These Mean Streets by the late Perry Thomas, who was from Spanish Harlem, who did a bid, all of this, came out, started working with the gangs in the West Coast, did a lot of good work out there. That was the first time I heard that term. And he spoke about the complexities you and I are discussing now, back in the 60s, and you're right, and if you look at kind of the militant movement back then and the Nationalist Party and all of the stuff that was going on, at least from a Puerto Rican standpoint, people oftentimes really disassociated themselves from us because things was pretty rough back then. But it's the same context as what we see kind of with, the Dominicanos. It's like a lot of them will fight you tooth and nail to say, yo, I'm not black, I'm Dominican. Okay, respect. But then 10 years from now, 20 years from now, when you're asking for blacks to acknowledge you as black, there's gonna be resistance because you fought it so hard. And that's humanistic behavior. That's just natural. Like, now, and especially if it appears, trendy, or if it appears, cultural appropriation, is like now it's like, are you trying to, is it cool to be black? Or is it, people are gonna be offended, and I get that,
Right. And it's funny, I don't know, can't remember, it's Greg somebody, I don't know if it's Greg Carr or Greg Thomas. They wrote this article about Eminem, and it was called Everything But the Burden. And I think literally that's what it feels like when I hear a lot of white or light-skinned Latinos be like, oh, I'm Afro Latino. You know what I mean? And it's like, you want to claim the, salsa merengue. You want to claim, it's like the white Cubans who claim, Celia Cruz, and you want to claim, Big Papi, or you want to claim, why is the name blocking right now? Last name is Walker, but baseball player. This is terrible. You know what I'm talking?
I can't think. I know you. I can't think of his name right now. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Roberto Clemente.
Yeah.
Roberto, you want to claim Roberto Clemente? Somebody's gonna smack me up for forgetting that. But
shout out to the Pittsburgh Pirates.
Yeah. Are you a Pittsburgh man?
No, but that's who we played for. You remember?
Yeah.
We played for them. Yeah.
For sure. So like, you want to claim those people, and you want to claim that legacy. You want to say that you're a part of it, but you don't bear any of the burden that whether it's Afro Latinos bear. You don't bear the same thing. As a matter of fact, you don't go to Loíza. You don't go to Colón in Panamena. You don't go to Limón in Costa Rica. You don't go those places. You avoid them. You avoid the people. You know what I'm saying?
Where it really matters, because when I remember when I used to do my work in Brazil, and we used to go to the favelas, I didn't see nobody that looked like us up in that joint. All of them, scholars or whomever or activists. That stuff, that activism, especially for my Twitter activism, folks, people, like you said, that burden. I love that context, because
Right.
people will only go. My first day of class, I always ask students, what are you willing to sacrifice to combat social injustices? And it's quiet, at least for 5 minutes. Because what are you willing to sacrifice? Because if you're really about the movement, you sacrifice a lot. I'm like, dude, boy, you better than me sometimes. Because, but because you're like, listen, my message is important. I don't care what Mark say, I'm out there.
Right.
And you know the kind of fan mail you get. So I mean, you talk about me. I mean, I appreciate the deference. Yeah, it's a blessing of what I'm able to do at this school or university. But dude, what you're doing nationally, globally, for your brand and for Maryland, speaking out against injustices and trying to, thwart some of these, misperceptions or misrepresentations. Dude, I salute you, B. I'm just like, you better than me. Because boy, I think I'm just a little bit more radical, man. I be wanting to take it to blows. So,
I mean, like I said, they don't ever step to me. So
no, I know.
But
we don't want that either. I don't want that.
Yeah, I don't want that either. You know what I'm saying? But what I will say, though, I want, and this is something that I'm working on right now. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I want to do what you're doing in terms of, finding a way to help people that didn't have the advantages that I had that got me, on these platforms and got me, to be able to call myself doctor and got me to those and professor and all of that, to those positions. And, I have, it's been in the news a lot, but I live 20 minutes from, one of the poorest cities in the nation, where there's a bunch of poor people that look just like me, older brothers who have, health issues, have HIV, have this, that, can't afford drug treatment, kids can't get education. I feel like sometimes, with I feel like I'm not doing enough. You know what I mean? That's the hardest thing. And I think for you and me, now we're going to get into a different conversation, but, this is something my dad always warns me. He's like, look, you can't get like a Messiah complex. You know what I'm saying? You can't get this whole, like, you're going to save the world thing. You know what I mean? But that it's hard not to do that, when you really think, I always think, I'm doing my part here, but what about this? And what about that? What can I do? And, it makes you feel kind of impotent because you're like, I can't reach, all these areas. I feel like there's a million talking heads. There's a million people that talk. It's like when you were in Roosevelt Projects, there was probably a dude who could pop off his mouth with the best of them. But, never saw the Knuckle Game. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I feel like what you guys are doing down there in North Carolina, you got a whole lot more Knuckle Game than I do. And that's something that I want. I want to be able to actually go somewhere and somebody say to me, what you did helped me to get housing. You know what I'm saying? What you did helped my son to get educated. Beyond, somebody, because the kids that I teach, a lot of them are from Montgomery County. You know what I'm saying? Not even PG. They're coming from Montgomery County. They're coming from Howard County. If they're from Baltimore, they went to City or they went to McDonough or Gilman, and if I weren't there, they'd still be in that position. They may not get an education, but they'd still be there.
But you also got, and your father's correct, man. And when I was working in social work years ago, that was like one of the biggest things they told you up front. Just reach one. Now, your platform, though, I mean, yeah, I'm kind of more in the trenches, seeing a lot of shifting going on.
Right.
But your platform, surprisingly, reaches more. You just don't see the immediate gratification because you're on the radio, you're on the news, but you'd be surprised, I would argue, if there's a young black male somewhere, and he's like, man, why is this black dude on Fox? But
Right.
then you're boxing, throwing jabs left and right with Tucker or whomever you're battling against, and you're holding your own with a smile because you always maintain that smile, professional. You'd be surprised. I always said that, Biggie said this best, the late great Biggie Smalls, more money, more problems. And I
Right.
always say, like, I use that in a kind of like in a notoriety context. Like, the more you get notarized, the more problems come with that.
Right.
So it's like like, I'm kind of like, I'm a big fish in a small pond, and that's cool. It works for me now. But, I do have a lot of flexibility in what I do and say. Um, and I do realize, like, when I do go on the media and kind of do some of my bits, you know, you still have to kind of be cautious of what you say. And sometimes I don't feel like being cautious. So that's why I limit my media stuff.
Right.
Because for me, it's like I am protesting. I am going to social media events. I mean, community events. I'm doing a lot of things, and I'm saying stuff freely without the constraints of the
Right.
media or during my time when I worked in the government. You could only say what you could say, or what they wanted you to say. So, I need you out there, B. I need you to keep pushing that narrative. And, maybe we'll switch sides one day,
Yeah.
for a little bit, because I am, I realize, to your point, I'm humbled by the work I'm doing here in North Carolina, but we have problems across the country. So I am expanding my brand that way. I need
Right.
a lot of people to hear the message. I need a lot of people to know that you can make it, be. I don't care how you grew up. I don't care what you did in life. If you got to put the work in, and that's what I tell you. You got to put that effort in. But if
Right.
you put the effort in, people like yourself, people like me, we'll guide you. We'll coach you.
For sure.
But you got to have the effort. But I'm expanding that because I think I've gotten to a point in my career professionally, and even some of the demons that I've had about being locked down, that I'm at a place now that I'm comfortable talking about it to people and sharing it. And my brothers are like, dude, you got to help these kids, man. Like, they need to hear this because they don't think they can do it. And I'm like, damn, you know what? Let me get off my butt, and let me go out there and really start inspiring these people, man. So
And I think it's really dope. Again, this is where your identity and your ability to go between different, audiences will help you. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can go to, the south side of Chicago, the west side of Chicago, and be around a bunch of young African American youth. You can go to Miami and talk to the Haitian and Jamaican youth. You can go to, you know, to LA and talk to a bunch of Mexican American youth. You know what I'm saying? And I think that they would accept your message. So I think that that's really dope. And any way I can help, I'm all in. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, nah, listen, dude, I enjoyed, man. I'm going on my 9th year here, man. 12 years in North Carolina now, 12 or 13, but it's like you've been around ever since, man. Indirectly here and there, and I remember from being on the yard to you growing. I'm waiting for the talk show. I mean, I'm waiting for one of these networks, BET, whoever, Aspire. I'm waiting for the
Yeah.
Jason Nichols show because it's there, because that's another angle for you.
Yeah.
You've kind of navigated those media spaces very well, dude. And
Yeah.
it's like, I enjoy it. You're the only reason I ever went to Fox News. Because I'm like, let me see what my dude is. Sometimes I can only tolerate a few minutes. I'm like, oh, I can't take anymore. And my wife be like, why are you so angry? She's like, man.
Yeah.
I was like, look, oh, that's your buddy. I was like, yeah, babe. I'm about to text him later.
Yeah, I mean, my wife is the same way. She's like, look, tell me the exact minute you're gonna be on. You know what I mean? And speaking about like our kids and their privileges, I can tell you right now, my kids, like I'm like, oh, Papi's gonna be on TV. They're like, so what? They're like, I'm like, not everybody's parents are on TV. You know what I'm saying? But for them, it's
Yeah.
nothing. You
See,
know,
now on the other, now my oldest, because my oldest is like, he falls hard under my shadow. So it's like he'll be at school and his students would be like, his buddies be like, yo, we saw your dad on TV again. Or we saw, and he'd be like, I know. Like you said, he's like, oh, I know. Yo, your dad is incredible. I know. Like, and that's hard, B. Because it's like, for him, now my youngest loves it. He'd be like, Dad, stick it to them. Like, because he's so militant right now. I'm working on him, boy. He's he's like me. He's like, he don't
right.
like, he's just like, Dad, like, I just wrote this column for these mass shootings recently. And he's like, okay, Dad, I'll read it when it's ready. I was like, okay, but I want to encourage them to use their privilege for good, not evil, basically. Because
Right.
privilege is good to a degree. I have students who are blessed. If you were blessed, both parents wealthy, and you appreciated it, there's no, and you talk about this a lot with your listeners. There's no hurt or foul in being wealthy, but it's how you carry it, how you make it good.
Right.
What is your philanthropy like? Because just being egocentric and and being oh, I'm this. Nah, if I ever became wealthy, that's just not my hustle, B.
And I agree. I think one of the things that we have to do and teach our kids, and for anybody that's listening that has children, and they're growing up with certain advantages. I know for me, I recognize my own privilege. You know what I'm saying? Like, I recognize I didn't grow up like Jack Monell. You know what I'm saying? I got to, yeah, I went to the hood, but guess what? I got to go home. You know what I'm saying? To my house where I had my own bedroom. You know what I'm saying? Like, and once I got older, I had basically my own bedroom, my own bathroom, basically. You know what I'm saying? I had certain advantages. I went to great schools throughout my school career for the most part. And so I think one of the things a lot of times we have to watch for is that sometimes our kids want to believe that they live the same life we did. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but I said this actually in the first podcast where I interviewed my wife, my beautiful wife, and we were talking about being a child of immigrants because she's her mother, her father passed away, father Black Dominican, mother white Colombian, and she identifies as a a biracial Black Latina. And what happened, her mother couldn't speak English, so it was like, when she was like 5 and 6 and 7 years old, she's going to Social Security and translating and reading letters from immigration and this and that. You know what I'm saying? And so that's why I think about a lot of times, and I've talked about I've gotten slaughtered because I've talked about like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez,
Right.
and she doesn't recognize her own privileges. That whole I'm from the Bronx, like, and it's like, well, I went back and forth. I'm like, but you got to leave. You know what I'm saying? You weren't stuck on Stevenson. You weren't stuck on Gun Hill. You know what I mean? Like, I
You
got
wasn't in Bronx
there.
River.
Yeah, I'm like totally
and see,
different.
and that's you talk about privilege, and I even use it in this context. So yeah, I lived in the hood, I was locked up, this and that. But then I look at the exonerated five, who I
Right,
was locked up with. I know them personally, and I look at what they endured and still endure, and it took almost 30 years for them, for society, for the world to realize that these five Black and Latino youth, and the extended, because there was about 30 of them altogether that got arrested for varying crimes, that now they're able to use that incredible injustice as a gift.
right,
My privilege, so even my privilege was that, yeah, I committed my offense, served my 4 years. I came home. I didn't have a rape charge. So in the context of society, oh yeah, he messed up, but he's no rapist, or he's no this, or he's no that.
right, right.
They had to endure that. And I think, it's crazy because when we look at this privilege thing, in varying contexts, it's like I'm privileged now. We're both privileged.
For sure.
We have income. We're professional. We're very well respected, regarded in our fields. We have families, and I remember I every day I wake up and I look around. I'm like, yo, I'm glad I'm not sharing a room with my 4 cousins anymore, yo.
Right.
Because that's the reality, B. And it's a blessing. And I think sometimes, to your last point, you and I went to college with kids like this. I went to college with kids who wanted to act like they were from the hood, who lived in Fort Washington, Maryland, or Howard County, Maryland,
Yeah.
$400,000, $500,000 homes. Dude, when I leave here, I go back. I got to put a bulletproof vest on and go back to my projects when I went home for breaks.
Right.
That's the life I lived while I was in undergrad. So my thing is, you don't want my life. I think I tweeted this the other day about something. You do not want to be hood. Don't front. Enjoy
Right.
your blessing. Be grateful your parents provided.
But what's crazy about that is, because I grew up in Howard County. You know what I'm saying? So I saw that all the time. I can think of a couple of dudes.
I know.
Right? Like, these dudes, they straight up look like Wu-Tang Clan. They were walking around like they were the super hardest dudes that, and it was like, I think part of that is because with my generation and in the suburbs, we were the first generation out.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Right. So a lot of us, like me, left the hood when we were like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old. You know what I'm saying? So there's a little bit of guilt too, because like your family members, your cousins, your friends, they're still stuck in the hood. Yeah. So, and there's even a little bit of jealousy, like, oh, you think you white now. You know what I mean? Like, you get a little bit of that. So then it's like, I got to prove myself. You know what I'm saying? And I got to be authentic. And how do I do that? And for a young mind, they're not thinking, yo, I can be authentic by being the next Malcolm. I can be authentic by being the next Dr. King. That was always in my mind a little bit. I'm not going to lie. Like, that was something that I thought about, because I had the type of parents where, my parents are from the 70s and the 60s. So they had all kinds of Black books, you know what I'm saying? And from around the diaspora, because my father grew up all over and my father's family is from all over. So like, I had, and my father's father was a Black studies professor. So we had all that was, education is kind of the family business on my father's side. My mother is, I don't even know exactly what project she's from, but I know she's from Bed-Stuy and Brownsville. You know what I'm saying? And Harlem, when she got a little older. So, and I know she grew up with nothing. You know what I mean? Like less than nothing, So for me, it was like, you feel a little bit of guilt. There's a suburban Black kid guilt that you feel because you're like, why me? Why am I out? You know what I mean? It's not the acting white thing, but it's more like, you feel like, yo, I got to prove that I'm somehow still authentic.
Yeah, I would say that. I could see my sons kind of enduring some of those struggles. And then, couple that with both your parents are educated and highly educated. And, it makes it almost, I guess in a way, this going to sound ignorant. It's not, but it's like somehow or way that makes you not Black. Like, I don't know, like, like you got to prove, because being hood, being tough, I guess, is still, I mean, if you look at it generationally, the bad boys have always been, like, that's always been attractive,
Yeah.
Like, either white or on the Black side, like, back in the 50s, James Dean and them, and, leather jackets, and, people gravitated to kind of the bad boy image,
Right.
So it's like, our kids are suburban kids.
Right.
Not that they're soft, but they're just suburban.
Yo, but I'm gonna say something, and it's funny because, and I hope you don't get mad at me. I hope you don't get mad. But, I see you got Nail You on right now.
Right.
And I'm not going to lie. There was a couple of points, even kind of recently, where I was like, I remember talking to my man recently, too. I was like, yo, I think I'm going to try to pledge. You know what I mean? He's like, dog, you're 40-something years old. What? Like, he's like, yo, you got a newborn. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, why don't you put your energy into that? And I was like, you got a point. And I got to admit, so alphas have tried to get me to pledge several times. I've had alphas approach me. But I was always like, and my one boy always gets mad and he makes fun of me because I was like, nah, I'm not going to pledge. But if I do, it's going to be Omega Psi Phi.
Right.
You know what I mean? Why? In part because they're the bad boys. I'm not even going to lie. You know what I mean? Like, why? Because at least that's the perception. And that's why I think it's dope that you have the Nail You on that you have right now where it says educator. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like challenging that perception. But the perception is, I'm not going to lie, that y'all athletic, athletic trainers, football players, cops maybe,
Which is now it's funny you say that. Shout out to the bros, man. Perception wise, definitely. But historically, you'd be surprised or not who are actually Omegas, right? Who are the bros,
Right.
I mean, you talk about the movers and shakers of this society from day one, right? But like, the perception, especially here in the South, like you a big black football player, rough tough and all that stuff. Like, when I throw my suits on, they be looking at me like, but my attitude is always New York, so it's different. But I will say this, man, as far as that goes. Your buddy gave you good advice, focus on your newborn. But that being said,
sure.
But my thing with that is, and it's somewhat timely. It is my hope. I use Omega as a tool as well to get my message out and inspire these young bros and people I work with in the community. But it is my hope that the D9, the Divine Nine, gets back to its essence of really, really reinvesting in our community. And I'm not saying we don't, but I just firmly believe we're at a stage today, more than any, that we have to do much more. And that's my, the ladies do very well, the sororities. They reinvest, they do the frats, we could do better. But I think collectively, as one cohesive unit, we talk about numbers.
Right.
We really, really work together the way we should. There's no force on this planet that could stop us. To benefit our communities, to uplift our communities, to get our communities where we're self-sustaining, creating our own banks, creating this, creating that, while integrating with others if that's what you so desire. But that's my charge, man. I want us to do better. And, because we the bros, we're going to have fun doing it too.
Yeah, I gotta give a shout out to my grandmother who turned 90 years old in February.
Look at that.
And she's an active member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority at 90 years old. That's what shows you, and that's the kind of thing, I'm like, it's a lot of love there. The fact that she is still active, still goes out with her red hats and all of that. And, but it was different for me, my dad, my uncles. They were different because my dad and my uncles, two of my uncles, they grew up overseas.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it was like, they came back in the middle of the Black Power movement and they were like, they didn't really get it, and joining a frat, like that wasn't like their thing, you know what I mean? And so, I was raised by my dad and that wasn't something I really thought about. But it's funny to me, because like I've talked to like women and stuff like that, and it'll be like, we'll play a game where it'll be like, oh, what fraternity you're in? I won't say that I'm not in one. I'll just guess. They'll be like, you're an alpha. And I'm like, what if I'm a Q? They'll be like, nah, nope, you're an alpha. You know what I mean? which
Well,
is fun.
listen, to your defense, I've had many of folks that must be under a rock because everybody pretty much follows me on social media. But if they don't follow me, they don't know. They be looking at me like, "You're cute," and I'd be like, why the f not? Like,
Yeah.
you don't know, like, especially pre-beard, like, because I had the clean face back in the days,
Yeah.
and
I can see you as a Kappa back in the day.
watch him out. See that'll get you hurt, B. That'll get you hurt, B. But that was always like the running joke. People always be like, but once again, perception, right?
Yeah.
Every fraternity, every sorority has its obvious stereotypes, but then, it has the reality, and the reality of it is that we're particularly, as far as the press goes, or Making Stuff Opportunity Incorporated, we're an organization that embodies everything. We believe in friendship. That's critical to us. And so it's we do everything extreme, man. We do everything. We're made in a way that makes us not take anything for granted, and we push to the hardest, man. And we do that with everything, with zeal, incredible zeal, B. So
Do you think it's do you think, and I guess this will be the last question because I don't want to take up your whole day, but like,
yeah.
do you think that Black fraternities and sororities are going to be, I don't want to say relevant, but are going to be as significant as they have been in the past? I mean, I was reading this article and they were mentioning like, powerful African Americans now, and a lot of them, there was a time where it was like, okay, he's a Q, he's a Sigma, he's a Kappa, he's a,
right.
But now, you look at people like Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, you look at, Oprah, you look at a lot of these people who are not affiliated, you look at Dr. Nichols, you see these people and they're not affiliated with any, organizations. First of all, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or is that showing that they will not have the same relevance that they have today and in the past?
I'm gonna provide it in this context, and you'll get it. One will argue that historically Black colleges and universities aren't relevant today. So, that being said, we will always be relevant. But I do believe that many of us are in a stage of evolution of sorts, right? Like this is the 21st century. So I do believe that the organizations internally are rethinking how we do things, how we conduct business per se, and how that business translates into our communities, right?
Right.
I think we will always be significant as long as we still put forth the effort. And you will always have individuals who, for whatever reason, just didn't see the need for them to join an organization. It's no different than white fraternities and sororities. Everybody who's white doesn't join a sorority or fraternity, and they've done well in this world, I guess. So right. I just think, many of us, organization-wise, we're working towards figuring out how we fit into the 21st century, because social media, it just really has changed a lot of things. But as with HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, you have many Black folks, I'm not even talking about white folks, Black folks who continue to look at our institutions very negatively, and it's disheartening because, for whatever reason, they feel like we've arrived, we made it, hey, we had the first Black president, and we've made it. But at the end of the day, we're the only institutions that still openly accept all people. We're specific for Black folks, but we have Asians, we have Latinos, we have whites. We don't exclude.
Right.
So we still serve an incredible service to our community. And I believe the fraternities and sororities are the same way. But I do believe that we have to do a better job at reinvesting and focusing on what's important. And I do believe that's where we're at this stage. At this stage in kind of the organizational scheme of all the D9, and the same with the historically Black colleges because they're closing left and right. So,
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. Dr. Jack Monell, I want to thank you once again. Thank you for coming on tour with us. And we definitely going to have another conversation. I had so many questions that we never fully got to. But thank you so much for adding your perspective, and hopefully you'll come back on very soon.
Dr. Nichols, man, always a pleasure, man. You keep doing your thing, hermano. You make me proud, B. Keep doing your thing. Continued peace and blessings to your beautiful family. Keep your head on swivel. Stay strong, healthy, both mind, body, and soul. And we'll wrap again soon, B.
No doubt.
All
Yo,
right, man. Peace and blessings, man.
peace.